we left off, Jerry left off with, we're in the midst of chapter 24 of Acts. Acts 24, and that would be lesson number 21. And he said to start with question number 3. But I think it'd be in order to have a little bit of a recap and go over why do we find Paul on trial in chapter 24? What started all this? As is usual, a lot of times brawls start with misunderstandings. And what was the misunderstanding let's see, it was in chapter 21. Okay, well, let's turn back to chapter 21. And I'll just focus on one verse. The Jewish brethren of Jerusalem, and I've been teaching Galatians to the high school students, so you have to make a distinction between Jewish Christians and Jews who are fighting Christians, but they have some similarities in that they hold on to the law. And that was the problem in 21. When Paul went to Jerusalem, as he was determined to do, the brethren met him and told him in verse 21 of chapter 21, speaking of the Jewish brethren, "They have been informed concerning thee, that thou teachest all the Jews who are among the Gentiles to forsake Moses, telling them not to circumcise their children, neither to walk after the customs." Is that true? Did Paul ever say, being a Jew, he was Jewish, did Paul ever say, "Don't circumcise your sons, you Jewish brethren"? I can't find it if he did. Now, what he did do is he would not let, and this is chapter 15 of Acts, and the apostles agreed, we are not going to bind the law of Moses on Gentile Christians. That's not going to happen. And right along with that is, we're not going to force Gentile Christians to be circumcised. So the very first thing that they approach Paul on in chapter 21 is a total misunderstanding that should have been cleared up actually in chapter 15 when the apostles conferred in Jerusalem. But what they were proposing to Paul in chapter 21 was not unscriptural. It was a matter of expediency. They informed Paul of 4 men that have a vow that they need to take care of, and they're proposing that Paul accompany them. And they went to the temple. Verse 26. Purifying himself with them, went into the temple, declaring the fulfillment of the days of purification until the offering was offered for every one of them. So they did that. But what was the misunderstanding? And I would posit that it was a malevolent misunderstanding. They were trying to catch Paul in the act. The misunderstanding was that they had seen the Asian Jews, and that's what I kind of find fascinating, is that these folks are more transportation savvy than we give them credit for. These are the Jews, not the Jewish Christians, the Jews who were persecuting Paul primarily in Ephesus, and now we find them in Jerusalem, And they make the accusation against Paul of what? What's the accusation? Verse 29. They had before seen with him, that is Paul, in the city, Trophimus the Ephesian. That's a Greek name. He's Gentile. Trophimus the Ephesian, whom they supposed that Paul had brought into the temple. They see him in the city and they say, he must have gone in the temple with Paul. And that, of course, is a big no-no for the Jews. And that's the basis of what we're seeing in chapter 24. That's the basic misunderstanding, I would say malevolent, because they could not prove their position. That was the misunderstanding, and here we go. In chapter 21, they have a brawl, and who gets involved in the brawl? Who breaks up the brawl? Who breaks it up? The Roman captain, Lysias, breaks it up. He comes in, he breaks it up, and zoom back with me a bit. The whole thing about the Romans in Jerusalem and Judea and being a grandfather of 4 grandsons, I kind of get it. They just want peace. They are there to keep the Jews from insurrection. And so this Lysias runs in, he takes Paul out of the situation. Paul starts speaking to him in Greek, not Hebrew, and he's amazed from that. He thinks he must be the Egyptian that had stirred up sedition, but Paul eventually tells Lysias, I am a Roman. And Lysias kind of smarts off and says, well, big deal. So am I. I bought my Roman citizenship. What did Paul say to that? I was born a Roman. And that had significance. Okay, so that's chapter 21. That's how it all started. Briefly in chapter 22. And these names, these Roman names are interesting. Ironic. There's irony in this that English speakers don't get, but Lysias, the captain, and we're going to find out later why it was him that was involved, but Lysias is a Greek name, not Latin. It's a Greek name, and it comes from the Greek word to loose or unbind. Now, isn't that ironic? He once he finds out Paul is a Roman, he's not about to beat him, just like in Philippi. He's not about to beat him. He gives him some freedom, and that is what the name Lysias comes from. But anyway, I need to get into chapter 24. When in chapter 22 Paul appears before the Sanhedrin, another brawl starts. And Lysias is there to hear it because he wants to try to figure out what's going on. And it's Paul realizing that here I'm speaking with the Sanhedrin both to Sadducees and to Pharisees. And he knows what about those two groups? Remember? I'm sorry?
They're divided on the issue of
resurrection. And so put yourself in Lysias' shoes, and you're sitting here in all this, and of course what is the Roman religion? It's polytheism. It's all these gods and idols that the Greeks dreamt up that the Romans just adopted. So this issue of these two groups in the Sanhedrin, resurrection versus no resurrection, I'm sure that Lysias, just like Gallio back in Corinth, in I think it was chapter 18, wasn't it? Gallio cared for none of these things. Once he found out that the accusers being Jewish and that Paul being of Jewish extraction. He didn't know the ins and outs of being a Christian. But once he heard that it was a religious argument, he didn't want to have anything to do with it. And I think probably Lysias was concerned at this point that this is just a religious disagreement between these two groups. But Paul knew what he was doing when he did that. So they have another brawl, and he has to pull Paul out of the situation, and so that's when Paul in verse 27 of chapter 22 says that he is a Roman. Okay, so chapter 23, he addresses the Sanhedrin, and actually that was where the brawl was in chapter 23. And so Lysias decides enough. I think of it in the modern terms of this is above my pay grade. I shouldn't have to put up with this. He says, I'm taking you, Paul, to the governor, who is where? Where is the governor Felix in the midst of all this? In Jerusalem? He's not. He's off away where? Caesarea. Now, even Caesarea, the term Caesarea can be confusing because there's more than one. It's kind of like Springfield. Do you know how many Springfields there are in America? But Caesarea, there's two primary ones. There's Caesarea, what was called Caesarea Maritima, which comes from the sea. It's on the sea coast. Caesarea Philippi was another city that was northeast of the Sea of Galilee, inland. So, and that was considered amongst the Romans. That was the capital as far as they were concerned. Herod the Great had built it up. It had existed before Herod the Great, but he built it up and he pretty much made it his capital, his fortress. It was an easy route between Rome and the eastern Mediterranean sea coast. So he's going to take Paul to deal with Felix. And verse 23 of chapter 23, how many folks accompany Paul and Lysias? Can you do the addition real fast? I'm sorry? 470? Yes, 400. I thought 200, but 470 to take one prisoner about, I think Jerry said about 60 miles from Jerusalem to Caesarea. And to me, that shows the care that Lysias wanted to take so that under his watch, these Jews were not going to kill Paul. They're not going to have their way, especially from the angle that Paul is a Roman citizen. So, 470 accompany him. Some turned back about midways, and it was Antipatris, I believe, was the town between the two. But they went on and they took Paul. So that gets us to chapter 24. So Jerry had covered the initial address of the, I guess you'd say the prosecuting side. I don't think of it as prosecuting, but the Jewish side, the accusers, they come before Felix. They hire this Tertullus, and that is a Latin name, not Hebrew. That's a Latin name, and it's kind of ironic. It means it's a diminutive. It means little third, and that to me is ironic in that he's a hireling. He's hired by the Jews. He's just throwing out the accusations. He may not know firsthand what occurred at all, and a lot of lawyers don't. They're just presenting what their clients tell them. But he is making all these accusations to Felix. Felix has an ironic name. Does anybody know what Felix means? Yes, sir.
It sounds like the word fellow, but it really, I think it's like happy.
Yes, exactly right.
Like Feliz Navidad.
That's exactly right. That's right. To say happy or merry, like Merry Christmas, Feliz Navidad. That is from the Latin for happy. We have an old word in English, felicity. Most people don't use that word. Most people don't know what it means, but it means a state of happiness, felicity. So that's kind of ironic, given his history with the Jews. I can't remember if Jerry talked to y'all about Felix, but Felix was just about as malevolent, evil as Pilate had been in the days of Jesus. He saw to it that the high priest got murdered, which is ironic. And, here they're accusing Paul of just, we'll see in a minute, it's a very loose accusation, but basically defilement of the temple. But Felix killed the high priest. He did it through secret means. They never did find the ones that had killed. I think his name was Jonathan. I think the high priest's name was Jonathan. But he had him killed. And he was not in love with the Jews at all, just like Pilate. But we're going to see at if we get that far, we're going to see at the very last verse of chapter 24, Luke says he wants to do the Jews a favor, and I would say that that's probably because he wants to keep peace, just like Pilate offering Jesus up to be crucified. He said in the book of John, he said 3 times, Pilate said, I do not find this man guilty. I find no guilt in him. Which is ironic when Peter denied Christ 3 times. But Pilate said, I find no guilt in him. But the Jews were literally screaming for his head, crucify him, crucify him. And to keep peace, he succumbed to the Jewish demands. And so there's always this tension with whoever the Roman governor is versus the Jews that are always fomenting insurrection. And of course in AD 70, that's when it just boils over. And the corollary to that of keeping peace is that supposedly Jonathan the high priest had threatened that he was going to report to Caesar back in Rome of all the bad things that Felix had said, or had done rather, all the bad things that Felix had done. So Felix just has him killed. So that's the background of what we're seeing here in chapter 24. So let's go back over the accusation. Verse 2 is, lawyers, I was on a 2-week case last fall, and lawyers love to talk and use flowery language. Look at, again, what Tertullus says. Seeing that by thee we enjoy much peace. Really? What little we have gone over with Felix, have they enjoyed much peace under Felix? And that by the providence, evils are corrected for this nation. So, not knowing any history behind it, we just kind of take this verse at face value. But this is glossing over a lot of malicious deeds. And we accept in all ways and in all places most excellent Felix with all thankfulness. So he says, I'm not going to be tedious. I'm going to just use a few words. But then he makes a 180 in verse 5, and he throws every word, every accusation against Paul. He's pestilent fellow, mover of insurrections. Now that one gets the attention of the Romans. Mover of insurrections. That's, remember, just keep the peace. Just keep the peace so I can keep my job. Mover of insurrections among all the Jews throughout the world, and a ringleader of the sect of the Nazarenes. Does your version by chance use anything besides the word ringleader? I looked it up in three versions, King James, New American Standard, and American Standard, and that word is the same in all three, which is rare. Teaching high school, there are different versions being used, and so we have discussions of words a lot. But ringleader has a very interesting etymology. I'll go ahead and go down in English, it's middle. I thought, when I heard ringleader all this time, I've always thought of circus for some reason. I just think of circus, like the master of ceremonies or what. That's not it at all. Middle English, 1500s. It comes from a phrase, lead the ring. To take precedence, be foremost in a group, which probably is an extended sense from a meaning of one who leads a ring, they think, in the 1500s of dancers. I don't know why that would necessarily be a necessary inference on that, but that's what the etymology supposedly is of ringleader. So he's made all these accusations. He's not said one thing of really concrete evidence against Paul. He touches on it then in verse 6. The American Standard says, who moreover essayed to profane the temple. Now, I can essay to do something, and I'm still innocent if I haven't done it. I can, let's see, what are some other versions? That's American Standard. New American says, tried to desecrate. King James, gone about to profane. He doesn't say, we found Paul with Gentiles doing this in the temple. He essayed to profane. And then he has this little gripe. Chief Captain Lysias came and with great violence took him away out of our hands. It probably took great violence to get Paul out of there. But because they were going to kill him. Okay, so I know that Jerry has covered all this already, but that is the background going into Paul's defense. And we have question, going back in my notes, question number 3, how did Paul challenge the high priest and the elders? What are some ideas on that? How did Paul counter these accusations coming from the Sanhedrin? Yeah, David? Say it louder.
He said they should tell what misdeeds they found when he stood before the council.
That's true.
We would say almost like a lawyer might say, like, hey, these courts, why are you confused?
Okay, right. Okay, let's start with verse 11. Thou canst take knowledge that it is not more than 12 days since I went up to worship in Jerusalem. I think the point on that is I didn't have time to really organize and foment insurrection. It was only 12 days that I've been in Jerusalem. I've been out of town. I'm not a local in Jerusalem. Neither in the temple did they find me disputing with any man or stirring up a crowd, nor in the synagogues, nor in the city. You can't find any evidence against me that I have been in any of these places stirring up any man or any crowd. They can't prove the things they accuse me of. But here, verse 14. Verse 14. I confess unto thee that after the way which they call a sect, so serve I the God of our fathers, believing all things which are according to the law and which are written in the prophets, having hope toward God, which these also themselves look for, that there shall be a resurrection both of the just and the unjust. He's going back to what is absolutely the truth that they can't stand. He's preaching the gospel. He's preaching the gospel of Christ, that there is a resurrection. And I do remember listening to Jerry. It's a resurrection of everyone, the just and the unjust. It's not just the just. It's not two resurrections. One occurs first. One. It is the resurrection of the just and the unjust. Herein I also exercise myself to have a conscience void of offense toward God and men always. He talks about he was bringing alms and offerings, all these collections that he had made from the Macedonians, from Achaia, all these collections that he has made from saints who don't have a lot to begin with. Remember the Thessalonians? They didn't have a lot to begin with, but they gave as much as they possibly could to these needy brethren in Judea, in Jerusalem. But verse 18 to me is the crux of the matter. Amidst which they found me purified in the temple with no crowd, nor yet with tumult. But there were certain Jews from Asia who ought to have been here before me and to make accusation if they had aught against me. The primary beginners of this insurrection against Paul, this brawl, I call it a brawl, like a movie brawl. The primary thing is seeing Trophimus the Ephesian out here in the city and jumping to the conclusion that Trophimus had been in the temple where Gentiles are not allowed. And Paul had done that, kind of behind people's backs. Those guys are not even here in Caesarea to make that accusation against Paul. So that to me is the biggest one, that they're not, my accusers aren't even here. And under Roman law, it had its flaws. American justice has its flaws, but you are guaranteed to face your accusers, to face the accusations being made against you. Okay, so again, I would repeat, once Felix hears this, that should ring a little bit of warning bells, just like it did in Corinth for the Achaean Judge Gallio. I don't want to get involved in all these religious discussions. Okay, question number 4. Let's see if I can do this. Oh yeah. Felix postponed his decision concerning Paul because A, he had enough knowledge of the way to be deceived by the representatives of the Sadducees, or B, he wanted to hear more from Lysias coming from Jerusalem, or C, both A and B. What'd you put? If you put either A or C, I want to hear your explanation of A. The scripture does say, verse 22, Felix, having more exact knowledge concerning the way, and Luke uses this as a shorthand word. It even uses it back in chapter 9 when Saul is persecuting Christians. He's against the way. And in my Bible, it's capitalized. So the Christian life, the way we're walking as Christians, having more exact knowledge of the way, deferred them, saying, when Lysias, the chief captain, shall come down, I will determine your determine your matter. Yeah. So, I would say B is obvious, but A, you have to read something into it, I think, that is not there. Does anybody disagree with me? I'll be glad to hear it. And what I kind of focused on, and Jerry may correct me, and that's fine too. I want to hear his take on it. But to be deceived by the representatives of the Sadducees, I think, is the key, because I'm not so sure that at this point Felix is deceived. That's yes, sir.
My reading of how it has any titles is incongruent with what you're saying.
Part of it.
But he's saying that they didn't get deceived or he didn't get deceived because he had enough knowledge of the way than to be.
Right. Part of it to me is the construction of the language. He had more exact knowledge of the way. Does that mean he had so much knowledge that he was going to be a Christian right now? No, he didn't have that much knowledge, and we're going to find out later that he wasn't about to become a Christian, but he had more knowledge than he did going into this. And like I say, you compare Tertullus, what he said, Paul, what he said, especially once Paul gets in this discussion of the resurrection. He had more knowledge than he did before of the way, and I don't think at this point that he's being deceived by the Sadducees. I could be, huh?
I answered C.
What?
So I answered C on that one.
You did? Okay, let's hear it.
I was looking at verse 24. His wife was a Jew.
Okay.
So the relationship he had with his wife and the knowledge she would have brought in, he had some background on these things perhaps.
Okay. Nate?
I think we're all saying the exact same thing. It's just the way that A is worded. It means the same thing that you're saying. He had, maybe instead of enough reading, he had more knowledge of the way than to be deceived by the representation of the Sadducees. I think that's the intention of the way Jerry wrote A. Is to say what you're saying. So C is correct.
He knew enough that the Sadducees couldn't deceive
Okay.
him.
Okay.
That's what A is trying to say.
Okay. He had knowledge of the way to be deceived by the
He
representatives.
had enough knowledge and to be deceived. Maybe he had.
You know what? Now, seriously, this is a product of age. I typed the question in my notes, and I didn't write the word then. Okay, thank you. Yes, I agree, C. I'm sorry. I don't know if we're going to get to it or not, but I'd love to talk about Drusilla. But anyway, we probably won't reach that. So Felix put the trial off, and he did say specifically, when Lysias the captain shall come. Does it say anywhere that Lysias made it? Luke doesn't record it. And I don't know why that is. It's one of two things. Either he did come and Luke just didn't record it, or he never came. It's one of those two things. But to me, it's an interesting dynamic that Felix is on the coastline and all the turmoil is going on in Jerusalem. But anyway, that's what is presented to us. Okay, any more comments on that? Okay. I had written in my notes, and I'm not sure that, I know we don't have time, but one idea I had is Christians being persecuted by the government. I'd kind of like to get into that, because that has been occurring. Well, it's been occurring since the first century, obviously. But in the 21st century, We see signs of it in the English-speaking world. In Canada, Britain, there have been cases brought to court about speaking against homosexuality and standing firm on what the Bible says on such. And it may come here. The First Amendment guarantees American citizens the right, two rights actually, the freedom of religion and the freedom of expression. So that may be coming here, but the Roman law had guarantees for Roman citizens as well. And obviously, in the whole course of things, that was totally ignored in terms of Paul. That was totally ignored. It was up to the whims of the Caesar Empire. He had the right to go to Rome, have his case heard, but obviously the persecution trumped over law. But I don't have time for that. Similarity in Mark 15:15. Pilate, wishing to content the multitude, released unto them Barabbas, delivered Jesus. He sold out. Pilate sold out. His wife warned him, don't have anything to do with this good man. She had had a dream. But he sold out. Felix, we're going to see at the end of the chapter, what did he want? He wanted money. He was hoping to get money, but he sold out. He wanted to do a favor for the Jews. Let's see. What were some of the freedoms Paul received in Caesarea while a prisoner? What were some of the freedoms that he had? I still maintain that being a Roman citizen had a lot to do with this. B, hearing the trial, Felix probably said, this is just a lot of religious disagreements. But verse 23, he gave order to the centurion that he should be kept. Now, this centurion is not Lysias. Lysias was a chiliarch, a ruler of a 1,000 chiliarch. This is not Lysias. The centurion that he should be kept in charge and should have, American standard says, should have indulgence and not to forbid any of his friends to minister to him. So what would we term that in if you're watching movies? What would that be called? Yeah, or house arrest, maybe. Of course, he wasn't in his own private residence, but house arrest, that he didn't have freedom of movement to go anywhere he wanted, but others had freedom of movement to come see him. And so he did give him that, and I think perhaps the implication of that was he doesn't believe everything thrown against Paul in accusation. But verse 24, and we don't have much time. After certain days, Felix came with Drusilla, his wife, who was a Jewess, and sent for Paul and heard him concerning the faith in Christ Jesus. And it's time. I can't talk about Drusilla, but afterwards, if you want to talk to Drusilla, I've got some notes about her. Thank you for your participation.